My name is Lauren Mitchell. I'm 34 years old and I live in Chicago, Illinois. For years, I worked quietly behind the scenes of a company I helped build from nothing. I wasn't loud. I wasn't flashy. I was loyal. I trusted the wrong person. And that trust cost me my job, my dignity, and my seat at the table. But what they didn't know was that I understood every single move they were making, and I was already planning mine. Have you ever been thrown out like you were nothing after giving someone everything? Someone everything? Have you ever watched a person smile while taking credit for your hard work? What do you do when the door you helped build gets slammed in your face? Do you cry? Do you beg? Or do you stay quiet and let them think they've won? Because here's the real question. What happens when the person you underestimated knows all your secrets, all your numbers, and all your weaknesses? Stay with me, because this wasn't just revenge. This was taking back what was already mine. I was never the loud one in the room. I wasn't the person shaking hands at conferences or giving interviews about a vision and a leadership. I was the one who came in early, stayed late, and made sure everything worked even when nobody was watching. When the company was just an idea and a tiny rented office, I was there. When clients were few and money was tight, I was there. I learned every system, every process, every weakness, not because I wanted power, but because someone had to make sure the foundation didn't crack. At first, my role wasn't even clearly defined. One day I was handling client emails. The next day I was fixing internal workflow issues. And by the end of the week, I was managing entire projects. If something broke, people came to me. If a client was angry, I calmed them down, stood down. If deadlines were impossible, I figured out a way to make them realistic without anyone losing face. Slowly, without anyone officially saying it, I became the person who held everything together. I created systems that saved time and money. I organized data that had been scattered and useless. I built relationships with clients that went beyond contracts. They trusted me. They called me directly when something felt off. They listened when I explained why certain decisions mattered. But because I didn't demand credit, my work blended into the background. Success started to look effortless to everyone else. And when success looks effortless, people forget how much effort is actually required. The higher the company climbed, the quieter my presence became. Meetings started happening without me, even though the outcomes depended on systems I had designed. New managers were hired who talked confidently but didn't understand the structure beneath them. They spoke in big words, made bold promises, and leaned on my work without ever acknowledging it. I watched as my role became invisible, even though removing it would cause everything to collapse. There were moments when I considered speaking up, asking for recognition, asking for a title that matched my contribution. But I believed loyalty would speak for itself. I believed that consistency mattered more than visibility. I told myself that real value can't be ignored forever. What I didn't realize was that being indispensable doesn't protect you when the wrong person is in charge. It just makes you a threat. Behind the scenes, I knew more than anyone realized. I understood which clients were barely holding on, which contracts were fragile, and which relationships were built on trust rather than paperwork. I knew which systems were held together by shortcuts and which ones needed constant oversight to function properly. I knew who was actually doing the work and who was just presenting it. That knowledge wasn't power yet, but it was potential. The irony is, the more stable the company became, the more people assumed stability was automatic. They stopped asking how things worked. They stopped listening to warning. They stopped seeing me as a person and started seeing me as part of the furniture. Always there, always reliable, never questioned. And when someone sees you like that, it becomes easy for them to imagine the room would look the same without you. I remember sitting at my desk one evening, long after everyone else had left, looking at a problem that had cost the company thousands before I fixed it. There is no thank you email, no acknowledgement, just silence. That was the moment I realized something important. I wasn't valued for who I was, only for what I quietly prevented from going wrong. And prevention is invisible by nature. Still, I stayed. I stayed because I believed in the work. I stayed because I cared about the people who depended on those systems. I stayed because walking away felt like abandoning something I had built with my own hands. What I didn't understand yet was that staying silent was teaching others how to treat me. By the time the company reached a level where outsiders saw it as unsuccessful, my fingerprints were everywhere, but my name was nowhere. Decisions were being made by people who didn't understand the consequences. And when things almost failed, I was the one who stepped in quietly and fixed them. Each time I did, I pushed the inevitable moment further away. The moment when someone would decide they no longer needed me. That's the danger of being the silent builder. You become so good at holding things together that people forget what happens when you stop. They mistake your calm for weakness, your loyalty for dependence, your silence for submission, and they never realize the truth until it's too late. That the foundation they're standing on has a name, a memory, and a breaking point. It didn't happen in a dramatic meeting or with a warning that gave me time to prepare. There was no conversation, no explanation, no acknowledgement of years of work. It happened quickly, coldly, like I was being removed from a system rather than released from a job. One morning, I walked in expecting a normal day, and by afternoon, I was being told to pack my things. The decision had already been made. My opinion was no longer required. She didn't sit me down as a leader. She stood, arms crossed, speaking in a tone that suggested inconvenience rather than regret. The words were polished, corporate, and empty. This isn't personal. We're restructuring. Your role is no longer necessary. Each sentence landed heavier than the last because every word was a lie wrapped in professionalism. If my role truly wasn't necessary, the company wouldn't have survived its early years. If this wasn't personal, she wouldn't have avoided my eyes. What hurt the most wasn't losing the job. It was how quickly I was erased. My email access was cut before I even reached my desk. Files I had created were suddenly a company property, stripped of my name. Clients I had personally onboarded were reassigned without a single heads up. It was as if they were trying to delete my existence in real time, hoping speed would replace accountability. Security walked me out, not because I was a threat, but because humiliation sends a message. People looked away. Some looked shocked. Others pretended to be busy. No one spoke. That silence was louder than any insult. Years of loyalty ended in a hallway walk that lasted less than 2 minutes. And in that walk, something inside me hardened. What she didn't know was that this wasn't just a firing. It was a declaration. By removing me so aggressively, she showed fear. You don't lock someone out that fast unless you're afraid of what they know. And I knew everything, not just passwords or processes, but pressure points, weak contracts, fragile alliances, clients who stayed because of trust, not branding. I replayed the moment over and over in my mind, not with anger, but with clarity. I realized she believed I was replaceable because she never understood what I actually did. She saw reports, not relationships, systems, not strategy, outcomes, not the invisible decisions that created them. She thought my silence meant compliance. She thought my loyalty meant dependence. The betrayal cut deeper because it wasn't sudden. The signs had been there, sin. Meetings I was excluded from, decisions made without my input, credit given elsewhere. I had ignored those signals because I believed in fairness. I believed work spoke louder than ego. I was wrong. In corporate spaces, silence isn't humility, it's permission. As I carried the box with my belongings to my car, I didn't cry. I didn't shake. I felt calm, dangerous calm. Because in that moment, I understood something she never would. She didn't remove a problem. She removed the barrier that had been protecting her from the consequences of her own decisions. She assumed I would panic, that I would scramble, that I would beg for a reference or quietly disappear. She didn't expect patience. She didn't expect restraint. She definitely didn't expect memory. But memory is powerful when it's paired with time and strategy. That night, I didn't update my resume. I didn't apply for jobs. I sat with the truth. I reviewed conversations in my head. I mapped out how everything was connected, how fragile the structure really was without me holding it together. And for the first time, I stopped thinking like an employee and started thinking like an observer. The betrayal wasn't just about being fired. It was about being underestimated. She believed authority was ownership. She believed position was power. She never realized that influence doesn't show up on organizational charts. It lives in trust, consistency, and quiet control. And those things don't disappear just because someone changes a password. That was the moment everything shifted. The moment the story stopped being about what she took from me and started being about what she no longer had access to. She thought the chapter ended when I walked out the door. In reality, that was the first page of a much longer story, one she would be forced to read without ever being able to change the ending. The days after I was let go were strangely quiet. No alarms, no urgent emails, no last minute crises waiting for me to fix them. For the first time in years, the noise stopped, and in that silence, something powerful happened. I didn't rush to fill the space with panic or desperation. I let it breathe, because calm isn't weakness, it's preparation. Everyone expected me to react, to call, to complain, to post something emotional, to warn people. I did none of that. I stayed invisible. I became unreachable on purpose. Not because I was scared, but because distance gives you perspective, and perspective gives you control. While they were busy congratulating themselves for moving on, I was finally seeing the full picture without being inside the storm. I started replaying moments I had ignored before, conversations that felt slightly off, decisions that didn't make sense at the time, requests that came with urgency but no explanation. Patterns began to emerge. The more I reviewed, the clearer it became. I hadn't just been fired. I had been removed at a moment when my influence had quietly grown too strong for someone else's comfort. Instead of updating my resume, I reviewed my mental inventory. I listed what I knew, who I knew, and why they trusted me. I remembered clients who had confided doubts, vendors who preferred working with me because I was honest, colleagues who came to me when leadership confused them. None of that disappeared when my badge stopped working. I didn't reach out right away. That was important. Silence makes people uneasy, especially when they believe you should be desperate. I let time pass. I let small cracks widen on their own. Systems I used to monitor daily were now unmanaged. Decisions that once had my quiet approval were being made without understanding the consequences. I didn't interfere. I observed. And slowly the call started. Not from the top, from the edges. A client checking in just to say hi. A former colleague asking how I was really doing. A vendor mentioning delays they hadn't seen before. I kept my responses warm but neutral. No complaints. No accusations. Just presence, just consistency, just enough to remind them who I was without saying a word about what had happened. There's a difference between revenge and repositioning. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone. I was letting reality reveal itself without my intervention. For years, I had been the buffer, the translator, the problem solver who absorbed chaos before it reached the surface. Now, without me, chaos didn't need help. It introduced itself naturally. I watched as deadlines slipped, as communication became messy, as small misunderstandings turned into expensive mistakes. And every time something went wrong, someone would say my name, not out loud, but in comparison. This didn't happen before. We used to handle this better. Well, there's something missing. That is something. It was me, and the absence was finally being felt. The most important thing I did during that time was nothing. I didn't rush back into another role. I didn't explain myself. I didn't defend my reputation. Because when your work has spoken for years, it continues speaking even after you leave the room. All you have to do is not interrupt it. Emotionally, it wasn't easy. There were moments when anger knocked loudly, asking to be let in. Moments when I wanted to confront her, to list everything she didn't understand, to demand acknowledgement. But emotional reactions give power away. And I had already learned that power doesn't come from being seen reacting. It comes from being seen remembered. Instead of reacting, I refined my understanding. I studied where the company was vulnerable without me, not in a malicious way, in a realistic one. I knew which clients were there because of loyalty, not contracts. I knew which processes needed constant human judgment, not just automation. I knew which roles were performative and which ones carried actual responsibility. And most importantly, I understood timing. You don't strike when emotions are high. You wait until confidence turns into carelessness, until the people who dismissed you start doubting themselves, until the organization begins to feel unstable and looks for something familiar to hold on to. That period taught me something profound. When you stop protecting people from the consequences of their decisions, you don't need revenge. Consequences do the work for you. All you need is patience and a clear memory of who you are without the title they gave you. By the time anyone realized I wasn't coming back, it was already too late to undo the damage my absence revealed. And by the time they started asking questions, I already had answers, just not for them. The calm after the fall wasn't emptiness. It was strategy forming in silence. It was strength reorganizing itself. It was the moment I stopped being an employee reacting to loss and became a force waiting for the right moment to move. I didn't announce my return. I didn't make a public move or send a dramatic message. Strategy doesn't need an audience. It needs precision. By the time anyone realized I was active again, the pieces were already in motion, and nothing I did looked like revenge. It looked like opportunity. The first thing I did was listen, quietly, carefully. I let conversations come to me instead of chasing them. Former clients spoke freely when they felt safe, and safety came from familiarity. They trusted me because I never overpromised and never disappeared when things got difficult. I didn't tell them what happened. I didn't badmouth anyone. I asked questions. I let them talk. People reveal more when they don't feel pushed. What I heard confirmed everything I already suspected. Service quality had slipped. Communication felt rushed. Decisions were being made by people who didn't understand the history behind them. The company still looked strong from the outside, but internally, it was wobbling. That's what happens when structure replaces understanding. You can copy a system, but you can't copy judgment. I began reconnecting dots that had always existed. Vendors I had worked with for years reached out about delays and confusion. I offered clarity, not complaints. Colleagues who once relied on me for guidance admitted they felt lost. I listened without inserting myself. I wasn't trying to take anything yet. I was reminding people what stability felt like. Then I positioned myself where I couldn't be ignored, not inside the company, but around it. I consulted. I advised. I helped solve problems that the company itself couldn't fix anymore because the knowledge had walked out the door with me. And every time I helped, I did it professionally, transparently, and legally. No lines crossed, no secrets stolen. Clients began making choices on their own. They asked for alternative arrangements. They requested contracts that gave them flexibility. They wanted contingency plans. I didn't encourage them to leave. I simply showed them options. When people feel empowered, they move naturally toward what feels safe. And safety in this case had my name written all over it. Inside the company, pressure started to build. Missed targets, unhappy feedback, confused leadership. They tried to fix it with meetings and messaging, but you can't meeting your way out of a missing foundation. Every solution they attempted treated symptoms, not causes, and I was the cause they had removed. What made the shift so powerful was how quiet it was. No lawsuit, no social media drama, no threats, just a steady redirection of trust. The kind that doesn't show up immediately on spreadsheets, but slowly changes the direction of the current. By the time numbers reflected reality, the momentum was already gone. At one point, someone from leadership reached out. Casual tone. Polite interest, testing the water. I kept the conversation respectful and distant. I wasn't angry. I wasn't eager. I was unavailable in the most professional way possible. Availability is leverage, and I had learned how to use it. Meanwhile, my own position strengthened. I wasn't rebuilding from scratch. I was reclaiming what had always been mine. Relationships, credibility, influence. I operated from clarity instead of survival, from choice instead of obligation. And that made all the difference. The irony was undeniable. They thought removing me would simplify things. Instead, it exposed complexity they didn't know how to manage. Every shortcut they took before had worked because I compensated for it quietly. Without that compensation, shortcuts became liabilities. I watched as they tried to replace me with multiple people, committees, consultants, new hires, each one covering a piece, none understanding the whole. Because what I brought wasn't just labor, it was context, memory, responsibility, and those things don't transfer easily. I didn't celebrate their struggle. I didn't enjoy it. What I felt was confirmation. Confirmation that my value had never been about my title. It had been about my impact. And impact has a way of resurfacing, no matter how deeply you try to bury it. The strategic takeback wasn't aggressive. It was inevitable. I didn't pull anything away. I stopped holding it together. I allowed gravity to do its work. And gravity is always patient. By the time the balance began to shift visibly, it was already irreversible. I had moved forward without looking back. I had created a future that didn't depend on their acknowledgement. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. Because when you take back your power the right way, you don't just reclaim what was lost. You redefine who gets access to you at all. I didn't celebrate their struggle. I didn't enjoy it. What I felt was confirmation. Confirmation that my value had never been about my title. It had been about my impact. And impact has a way of resurfacing no matter how deeply you try to bury it. The strategic takeback wasn't aggressive. It was inevitable. I didn't pull anything away. I stopped holding it together. I allowed gravity to do its work. And gravity is always patient. By the time the balance began to shift visibly, it was already irreversible. I had moved forward without looking back. I had created a future that didn't depend on their acknowledgement. And that, more than anything, was the real victory. Because when you take back your power the right way, you don't just reclaim what was lost, you redefine who gets access to you at all. If this story made you feel something, don't let it end here. Like this video so more people who've been underestimated can find it. Subscribe to this channel if you believe real power is built in silence, not noise. And comment below if you've ever been pushed out, overlooked, or betrayed. Because sometimes the greatest comeback starts the moment they stop watching you. Stay with us. More real stories, more quiet victories, and more reminders that being underestimated is never the end. It's the advantage.